Peace and welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. Today, folks, we got a lot to talk about. First, we're going to discuss how the January 6th panel committee has alleged that President Trump was involved in a criminal conspiracy to override the 2020 election. We check in with New York Times journalist Luke Broadwater to give us some insight. Also, diversity and equity in the workplace. How do we change the culture? We'll have that conversation. And then later, the story of war, how the narratives of what we're seeing in Russia and the Ukraine conflict and in the involvement of African students has played out and changed the whole dynamic of how this war is being told. And then later, we'll talk about how one museum has been built on hallowed ground, but are they doing enough to show respect for those that for those that have passed on? We got a lot to get to, so stay with us. It's the culture right here on the Black Star Network. Let's go. All right, folks, welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. We got a lot to talk about, so let's jump right into it. The January 6th panel has moved on, and they are currently looking at evidence. And it was just recently announced that they have found some level of evidence to show that former President Donald Trump has been involved in a criminal conspiracy to upend the 2020 election. They also have found that the former president worked with his attorney to create this conspiracy. We're going to check in now with New York Times journalist, Mr. Luke Broadwater, to give us some insight about this as the New York Times covered this whole situation. Luke, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Farajii, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And also, folks, we are joined by Laura Albas. She is a Palestinian youth organizer and a journalist as well. to be a part of this conversation. Laura, thank you again for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Luke, let's talk first about this whole situation with the president. I mean, the January 6th panel has been, or January 6th committee really has been subpoenaing a lot of people, close friends, associates of the president, I mean, his family members. And now they're saying that the president, the former president of the United States, may be involved in a criminal conspiracy to upend the 2020 election. That is really, really strong to say. Oh, that's a strong allegation, Luke.
Yes, you're right. I mean, the committee has now issued more than 100 subpoenas, actually more than 200 subpoenas. They've had 550 witnesses come in, even more than 550 witnesses. And so they're starting to gather voluminous evidence against former President Donald Trump. And what they revealed last night in a bombshell court filing was they laid out the potential criminal case against Donald Trump. And they named 3 specific areas of federal law that he perhaps broke. The first is obstructing an official proceeding of Congress. The second is a criminal conspiracy to defraud the American people. And the third is common law fraud. And these all deal with Donald Trump's refusal to admit that he had lost the election and to continue to perpetuate lies that the election had been stolen. And in addition to that, then taking concrete steps to try to overturn the election through the courts, through putting forward fake slates of electors, through entertaining schemes to seize voting machines, through a pressure campaign on various aspects of the federal bureaucracy, and then finally on pressuring Vice President Mike Pence and the members of Congress to try to overturn the election on January 6th, amassing a crowd at the Capitol that ultimately stormed the building, resulting in several deaths and more than 150 injuries to police officers. So it's a wide-ranging conspiracy, and they laid out the criminal case last night. And I think people for the first time really saw that this is the way this committee could make a criminal referral to the Justice Department to see if they could bring a criminal charge against Donald Trump.
So I think the big question that we all have, because it seems like, you know, there's that old moniker that we use to describe the former president as Teflon Don. It seems like as soon as you get close to, you know, possibly, you know, charging him or he's suffering some severe consequences, boom, it bounces right back off him. It's something, it doesn't stick. Is this is this like the nail that's going to be hitting the coffin? Is this the beginning of the end for the former president? Because here's the crazy part, Luke, you and I know this man is planning to run for office again in 2024.
Yes, that's right. Well, we have to see what's going to happen. This committee has no criminal charging authority. They can make a referral to the Justice Department, but they can't charge Donald Trump themselves. So they may say, we have found evidence of crimes. Here are the crimes he violated. Here's the evidence of the violations. But they can't walk into court and file the charges. Now, I will say on this committee, it's run by 2 former U.S. attorneys. It has more than a dozen federal prosecutors on this committee. So these are people who know the federal law and the federal code quite well and are good investigators. These aren't, you know, just like partisan lawmakers making stuff up, right? So if they have this evidence and they've accumulated it through all these interviews, all these documents they've received, it's going to be up to Merrick Garland at the Justice Department to take that evidence and charge it in a criminal court. That's going to be a big step. And there's a lot of pressure on him to do that. We'll see if he does. The thing that I think is holding him back is there is a tradition in America where the political parties do not seek to jail each other for the next term, right? I mean, that's something that we don't try to do in this country. And so there's a lot of resistance to trying to take that step. At the same time, we've never seen a president, at least in recent history, who refused to leave office after he lost, who schemed and plotted to try to overturn the election, subvert the will of the people. And we've never had a mob attack on the Capitol where the building was stormed and the peaceful transfer of power was disrupted. So there's a lot of Democrats here at the Hill where I am who want to see criminal charges, who want to see the president held accountable. But there's a lot of hand-wringing at the Justice Department about whether to do that.
Laura, when we see this situation unfolding like this, people have already kind of had many different views about this former president. We saw what happened on January the 6th and then it seems like everything was just completely just went out of whack. What's your take on what the work that the January 6th committee is doing and then this recent development?
Honestly, I don't know what to tell you, Farajii. I feel that I do agree with you. I do feel that it is the end of Trump. I don't think that he can come back, but at the same time, we've seen how different communities in the United States who resonate with Trump still believe in him. They're planning to come on a truck convoy to imitate what happened in Canada in a few days here in DC. But I believe that nothing will come of this. I feel that, Republicans are still too powerful. They do control half of the government. Trump has refuge in Florida. The governor will protect him. I don't feel that he will be caught in New York State. I don't think anything will come out of this.
Don't think anything will. And so, Luke, and I think Laura is bringing up a great point. I mean, how do you might see mounting evidence, and we're seeing this throughout since Trump left office, that there has been a number of violations that this man has done while in office. It's still being uncovered, whether you're talking about him taking the president, the White House documents and taking them down to Florida. I mean, just a number of things. Yet there is still deep partisanship where the Republican Party essentially protects him. So how can, how does the January 6th panel committee kind of navigate through this partisan space that we're currently in to show the truth of what really happened and who's really responsible, most importantly, the role that Donald Trump played in this whole scenario?
Right. Well, you're right that the politics of this are that the Republican Party is still very much in lockstep with Donald Trump. In fact, you brought up some, and it's well known, some of the very bad behavior that some of the members of the Republican Party have engaged in recent days and weeks, such as, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar speaking at a white nationalist event. And there was no punishment for that. But the only person that has been punished recently in the Republican Party was Liz Cheney, who joined the January 6th committee and has been leading some of the investigation into Donald Trump, and she has been stripped from her leadership position. So that made it very clear where the Republican Party stands about Donald Trump, that the only people who are going to get punished within the party are those who oppose him, no matter how racist or terrible others' behavior are. That said, the committee did, in this filing last night, lay out a pretty persuasive case for the facts that Donald Trump should have known, or definitely did know, that he was lying about the election. They laid out example after example where senior advisors to him, Justice Department officials, investigated the claims of fraud he was making, told him directly to his face that they were baseless and meritless, and he should stop saying them and stop talking about it. And he was tearing apart the country. One of the top attorney in the White House actually told him he was entering into a murder-suicide pact by repeating some of these claims and going down some of the extreme plans that were being proposed to him. So, they are presenting more evidence. I think that, most Democrats in this country now look at that and feel it's pretty persuasive against Donald Trump. But I mean, you're right. Will any Republicans come on board? What amount of evidence will convince them to abandon this man? It seems that maybe there's none, but they're certainly not going to give up. They're going to keep investigating, and they have until perhaps the end of the year when the midterm elections will be, and it's widely expected the Republicans will take over Congress and then dissolve this committee and end this investigation.
So one of the things that you said in your piece for the New York Times, Luke, is that this statement: the evidence gathered by the committee provides, at minimum, a good faith basis for concluding that President Trump has violated the obstruction count. The filing written by Douglas in letter, the general counsel of the House said, adding, the select committee also has a good faith basis for concluding that the president and members of his campaign engaged in a criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States.
Right. So, and those are no small counts. I mean, those are counts that carry up to 20 years in prison or more, depending how many are charged. It is illegal to disrupt an official proceeding of Congress. And the allegation that the committee is making is that it's not just the rank and file protesters or rioters who stormed the Capitol that day that did that, but that actually Donald Trump was part of a conspiracy to do it. He's the one who...
So like he planned for this to happen, so to speak.
Correct. And actually there's some language in that filing that says that he has connections to some of the extremist groups on the right, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, and alleges that needs further investigation, that there could be even stronger ties than what's known. Certainly those groups were getting direction from Donald Trump through his tweets and through other statements. They, you could see that they reacted when he would say certain things. But was there direct communication between any Trump allies and any of the members of those groups? We know, for instance, that Roger Stone, who's a close advisor to Donald Trump, was using Oath Keepers as security that day and had been in contact with the leader of the Proud Boys. So they believe there's a lot more area to investigate between the Trump campaign, Trump's allies, and the extremist groups on the right.
So as of right now, Luke, what's the timeline? I mean, and I'm only asking because, one, we're in an election year, right? So we're knowing that a lot of people are going to be going to the polls to vote in their next congressional representatives and state representatives. But what's the timeline, as far as you know, that this committee will try to move forward? Are they going to try to do, take care of a lot of this business before the end of the year, before the summer? What's the timeline that you're looking at?
Yeah, so we know they have depositions still scheduled through March. So they're still taking testimony all this month, and they don't want to cut off testimony too early, because if there are more people who come in and have more information, they want to keep the doors open to them. There's been talk of having public hearings in April and maybe having a report out this summer. They do probably need to finish the report by August, because those midterm elections are coming up. And frankly, it's expected the Republicans will win the House. And if the Republicans win the House, this committee will either be killed and there'll be no more investigations of Trump, or it will be redirected into investigations into other things that Republicans want to investigate, which are not the events of January 6th. They want to either forget about that, deny it happened, or engage in conspiracy theories that it was like a false flag operation, or lie and say Antifa did it or something like that. So they are on a tight timeline. They do need to finish up, but I do expect we will see public hearings in the spring or summer, and that report out at least by August.
And given the fact of the severity of this whole scenario, what do you foresee happening in terms of the impact that this makes on the American people? And something came up, a couple of days ago when we were looking at President Joe Biden's recent poll numbers, and found that his poll numbers aren't doing well. And I think that one of the big reasons is simply because Donald Trump had sown the seed of doubt and suspicion about him being the legitimate president of the United States. And that has added to people not trusting in his leadership, believing in him, believing that he's the president. So I mean, we're seeing that impact, but what other impacts do you see happening on the American people?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, one of the problems in the country is that it does seem like such a big base of the Republican Party is so loyal to Donald Trump that he could do anything and they wouldn't care. They'd stand by him. And I mean, Trump said this himself early on, right? When he said he could murder a man on Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't cost him a single follow.
Craziest statement ever.
Right. He saw right away what
statement
what
ever.
kind of impression he was having, how he held a certain segment of the population sort of captive to him. And so no matter what the January 6th committee finds, even if it is criminal conspiracy to defraud the public, even if they ring every alarm bell that they have, you can see a large portion of the Republican Party refusing to abandon him no matter what. So I don't know. It sometimes feels like a fait accompli that nothing will ever change. But that doesn't mean they should stop trying, and they're not going to. And so they're going to try to uncover every single fact they can, do public hearings as big as possible, maybe in prime time, where they roll out witnesses who talk about it in great detail, exactly what Trump did. And they're hoping maybe some of that can break through. Maybe that is an impossible task, but they're going to go as hard as they can with this investigation.
Laura, really quickly, when you hear that, and I love the idea about doing a prime time hearing, because I think that's like court TV 100 times plus, right? But when you hear all of this, how do we make sure that as we're organizing on the ground, that as folks are trying to deal with all of this partisanship and all of the other challenges that we got before us as the American people, how do we keep our hope and faith that the system or democracy will stay intact?
I think it's better to just ignore Trump. What the committee is doing and what Luke just said, it is important. It's important for American history, for memory, that we did something. It's good in the short-term sort of political, social sphere of this country. But at the same time, it will allow Trump to play the victim. It will anger his base. It will give his base more of a reason to make the situation dangerous for the democracy of this country and in the streets for people who live and don't want anything to do with what Trump is doing. And there's just one more thing which I think we should talk about as well, or just mention, is that prosecuting Trump sets a precedent. Presidents are immune to anything they do in office. If he is charged and prosecuted, are we going to charge Bush for the Iraq War? Are we going to charge other presidents for other things that they've done? So, yeah.
No, that's an excellent point. And to your and Luke, I know we got to let you go, but can you speak to that? Is if we start charging Trump, do we got to go retroactive and looking at all of the actions of former presidents?
Right. So, those are good points. And, what January 6th was, obviously a terrible event for democracy. But there have been, war crimes committed in America, in various American wars. And yeah, so how far back would you go with those types of investigations? I think that what the committee is trying to pursue are steps that are not protected by presidential immunity. So things he did outside of his purview as president, not a part of his official duties, such as encouraging a mob attack on the Capitol. So they don't view that as falling as part of a president's official duties and think that could be possibly charged. I do think there is this greater concern, though, on the part of the Justice Department about charging any ex-president, no matter how bad his deeds were, and what kind of strife that could cause for the country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Luke Broadwater, journalist for the New York Times. Luke, thank you so much. We'll certainly bring you back as these things continue to develop. But thank you so much for letting us know through the New York Times that that the momentum is still going, that the January 6th committee is doing their part to try to get to the truth of what happened on January 6th and the impact that it will make on democracy here in America. Thank you so much for your work, Luke.
Thank you, Farajii. Thank you, Laura.
Absolutely. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. But before we do, we just got some breaking news that former Louisville, Kentucky police officer Brett Hankerson, who was there the night of the killing of Breonna Taylor, he was found not guilty on all counts today after he was accused of endangering a couple and their 5-year-old son the night police raided Breonna Taylor's apartment. The jury reached their verdict following nearly 2 weeks of testimony and they deliberated for a little over 3 hours. We're going to continue to keep our eyes on this situation, on this whole story, but just know we'll have some discussion around it. Again, Brett Hankerson, a former police officer with the Louisville Metropolitan Police, is found not guilty in the trial of endangering Cody Etherton, his partner Chelsea Napper, and their 5-year-old son when he fired shots that went into their apartment on March 13th, 2020. Police were at the complex to raid a neighboring apartment that belonged to Breonna Taylor, and in connection to a narcotics investigation. And so, even though he didn't he didn't pull the trigger that killed Breonna Taylor, he was certainly there. But it's mind-blowing that really quickly, Laura, that he gets pulled into a trial for shooting into a neighbor's house and no one got charged for killing Breonna Taylor.
It's horrible. It's horrible. It's a reflection of the current state in the United States, where they will never give justice to the people who deserve the justice.
How about that? How about that? Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come back, let's switch gears. Let's talk a little bit about diversity and equity in the workplace and how one major retailer and pharmaceutical company is trying to do its work to change the balance of power and the dynamics of power in the C-suite. We'll be checking in with Senior Vice President of Diversity for Walgreens about their latest efforts. So stay with us. A lot more coming at you here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Folks, welcome back to the show. It's time for us to now switch gears to talk about an issue that needs to be discussed as we continue to celebrate Women's History Month. We just got out of this great celebration for Black History Month. And now we're in between these two times to look at the larger conversation around diversity and equity. We know that there is still a lot of progress that needs to be made to make sure that that in the workplace diversity is present, that there is a representation of Black and Brown leadership in many, many different areas. And so one company is saying that, look, we're going to take on the task, we're going to do more because we got to do better. And we're now joined by Carlos Cubia. Carlos serves as the Senior Vice President and Global Chief Diversity Officer for Walgreens Boots Alliance, as Walgreens is going to has created a docu-series called Ladders, Lift Up, Lifting as We Climb. Here's to talk about this issue of diversity and equity is Mr. Carlos Cubia. Carlos, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Friday, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on today.
Carlos, let's talk about this this whole idea of diversity and equity. You know, we know that this is a catchphrase. We know that in corporate America, if it's trending, you know, somebody in corporate America is going to repeat it. Somebody is going to make a campaign about it. But talk to us about what Walgreens is doing right now to not just talk about it or make it a catch slogan, but is actually making it happen.
Yeah, Friday, and thank you for that. And I think that's very insightful because you're right. A lot of companies, a lot of organizations use that term very loosely, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what does it really mean when it comes down to real action and putting, you know, and walking the talk, as they say. At Walgreens Boots Alliance, we have made a commitment to make sure that every part of our business strategy has embedded diversity, equity, inclusion within it. So what does that mean? It means that when we make decisions on what products are in our stores, have we taken into consideration the folks that are going to be coming into the stores, buying those products and services? When we give out contracts for different vendors and suppliers that supply these products in our stores and services, are we giving an adequate amount of those products and services to diverse-owned businesses, whether it's Black-owned, women-owned, diverse LGBTQ, or what have you? We have created goals across our entire organization, Farajii, to make sure that all of our senior leaders are now giving goals and objectives that they have to meet every single year to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we did last year, and then I'll stop here, is we created part of their bonus. 10% of their bonus is tied to hitting those numbers. So we're putting skin in the game for all of those leaders.
So one of the big things, Carlos, that Walgreens puts out there is that this data that only 8% of the highest corporate leaders or C-suite executives are Black, and that lack of representation of Black and Brown leaders in the corporation at the C-suite level, it really has been a real problem. Give us some more details about this. Why is it so hard for Black and Brown corporate leaders to be at the table, to be seen, to be heard, and to lead?
Well, so that gets to that whole issue when you talk about equity. When we talk about equity, how do we get more representation? And that's the phrase I use, more representation, more people that look like you and me sitting at the table so that they can address the needs and concerns of those communities that represent us and where we live and where we thrive and where, we make a living every day. Representation matters for so many reasons. We are a retailer. And as a retailer in urban communities, if we expect people to come into our stores and to patronize our stores and our products and services, we have to understand what their needs are. We have to know how to connect with them. And we have to have something in our stores to keep them coming back. So representation matters. When we're trying to bring employees on board, if I'm a job seeker, and a lot of job seekers today are looking online and see, what does your management team look like before I come to work for you?
Yeah.
And Farajii, as you know, we're in this environment right now where talent, it's a war on talent. It's hard to get talent. So you have to bring something to the table that attracts folks. And when they see a completely white C-suite, they may say, I don't want to go to work for this company. So it becomes a recruiting tool, it's a retention tool, and it's a development tool.
And you know what? And I think one of the big things, Carlos, is that if you see all white men or, white people in the C-suite, I mean, given this is 2022,
yes,
we have all of these racial justice issues. We have all of these, people are more affirming their identity now, and you're still seeing the same old style of leadership and representation and leadership. It really shows that that the company is disconnected from the pulse of the culture.
Oh, no question. And how can you say that you support these communities when you don't represent these communities? And not just in representation is key, and that's one of our goals here at Walgreen Boots Alliance is increasing women across our entire organization globally. And in the United States, one of our goals is to increase people of color in leadership positions. It's an actual goal, stated goal, and we're tracking that. We report out on it every quarter, and we show leaders copies of their organizations where they're falling short.
Yeah.
And so we are making it very visible where the progress is happening and where it's not happening. And where it's not happening, we're holding them account by their checkbook.
So talk to us a little bit about this this docu-series, this mini docu-series, Ladders Lifting as We Climb. One of the big things that it does is it highlights that the Walgreens Boots Alliance CEO, Roz Brewer, she is a Black woman who is that is over top of this whole initiative. Break that down for us, please, Carlos.
So yeah, as you know, we just ended Black History Month. I mean, at Walgreens Boots Alliance, and I'm going to steal this from McDonald's, but Black 365. It's you're not just Black in February. But one of the things, we just ended the highlight period for February, but we want to make sure that across the entire year that we're highlighting Black businesses, that we are giving contracts to Black businesses, that we are hiring individuals from the communities that deserve to be in these jobs. Farajii, I'm sure in your career, you heard many times, we'd love to hire more, but we just can't find good talent out there.
Oh my gosh. That's a slap in the face.
This is the first time you heard that statement, right?
Right.
When we hear that, we go out and through our sourcing and through the relationships that we build, through our corporate partnerships, we find tons of talent. Case in point, Roz Brewer, Black CEO, and we didn't hire her because she's a Black woman. We hired her because she was a captain of industry. Because she had done some amazing things in her career in terms of, CEO of Sam's Club, COO at Starbucks. She's a scientist, went to an HBCU. She's not your traditional corporate CEO. So when you look at Roz's story, and this is why it was important for her to do this docuseries to say, you too, little Black girl from Detroit, can rise to be the CEO of a Fortune 20 company. We're a $130 billion company for us. And we're one of the largest corporations on the planet, not in the United States, but on the planet. We're that big. We make a difference across the United States where every single day we touch almost 8.5 million people every day through our stores, our websites, our mail order prescriptions. Roz Brewer from Detroit, Michigan, Spelman grad, Alpha Kappa Alpha, is leading that charge. So that's why this series was important to say, she's not your traditional leader, but she's a force to be reckoned with.
Wow. So right now, with her being in the leadership role, with you being in the position that you're in, give us some insight as to, what can people expect in terms of hiring practices and making sure that representation is there. Are you putting some checks and balances in place to make sure that stores and that representation is felt to align, that digital print is there? Give us some insight on that, please.
Yeah, so even prior to Roz joining our organization, we were very focused on driving representation throughout the company. And to have a leader like Roz come in, who has been known for doing that throughout her career, has amplified and accelerated the work that we're doing. So think about Roz is the CEO of 400,000 employees across the globe. I'm going to say that again. She's the CEO of 400,000 people across the globe. We're in multiple countries. We all have over 250,000 folks right here in the United States, over 9,500 stores. She is the CEO for everyone. So her message to the organization is your voice matters no matter who you are. We want to hear from you. We want you to participate in the success of this organization. So when you hear the term, a rising tide lifts all ships, Roz Brewer has made sure that everyone here knows, from the store clerk to the senior vice president to the chief diversity officer, that we play a role in driving this culture forward, right? And so she is the captain of the ship, but she has a very capable crew to keep the ship floating and moving forward.
And you know what? And I'm glad to hear that. And I know that a lot of our watchers are glad to hear that. And we got to take a quick pause. When we come back, I want us to talk a little bit more, Carlos, about, you know, how this effort that we're seeing that Walgreens is taking, how that can be duplicated in other spaces, in other corporations. So I want to definitely have that conversation. Also, we'll bring back in Laura Albas to pose her questions as well. So, folks, stay with us. We're going to continue the conversation with Carlos Cubia from the Walgreens Boots Alliance. Stay with us. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
I've lost my audio.
Pull up a chair. Take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Folks, we've been talking about diversity and equity in the workplace, particularly with Walgreens. We've been checking in with Carlos Cubia, who serves as the Senior Vice President and Global Chief Diversity Officer for Walgreens Boots Alliance. They have a mini docuseries called Ladders lifting as we climb to discuss this issue of diversity and equity. And one of the big parts of the docuseries is highlighting the Black employees who are doing and making progress within the company. And of course, their CEO, Roz Brewer, who joined the team back in 2021. I'm going to bring in Laura Albas, who serves as a Palestinian organizer and journalist, to also be a part of this conversation. And also, folks, you can post your comments. We'll get to your comments as well as we have this discussion. Laura, when we look at this conversation around equity and diversity, and we started off the discussion saying that it's good catchphrases, it's a good sounding words, but it's hard to put those things into action. Hearing that Walgreens is taking some big steps and taking these initiatives, what's your take? Are you feeling like there may be a pathway to diversifying the C-suites?
There is a pathway, but there are also a lot of challenges. What I'm specifically curious about is, there are kids maybe from middle-class areas, from diverse backgrounds, who have access to internships. Their parents can help them get introduced to different types of careers and try to learn. But there are also kids from, Asian, Arab, Black, Hispanic backgrounds who don't have access to these things. They can afford unpaid internships or just being introduced and to know that, oh, I can be an executive one day. So I'm curious, how can we bring these executives, politicians, people who hold these roles from minority backgrounds to areas that are often disregarded in the United States?
Great question.
Well, so we have a number of programs that are in the communities to help through what we call workforce development programs, whether it's programs to help high school students to learn about careers. And then we do job training. We have summer internships that are paid programs. We work with folks entering the workforce in underserved areas, and not just African-American areas, but underserved and rural areas across the United States to make these programs available. We do it through contributions. We do it through mentorships, through our business resource groups. And I think we have over 20, and don't quote me on that, but I think we have over 20 business resource groups or employee resource groups that work with different demographics, like the Latino groups, African American group. We have the Pride group that reaches the Asian group that reaches these underserved areas and groups that are often overlooked, to provide these programs and make these things available to everyone. There's still a lot more that corporate America can do. I won't speak for the politicians. I'll leave that for another show, Farajii. But in terms of corporate America and where I sit in the areas that we control, we understand that there's a huge swath of the community that's often overlooked. But when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion at Walgreens Boots Alliance, it's anyone that doesn't look like you. So we've broadened our definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not just a race thing anymore. It's about all the dimensions of diversity, and we're serious about that. I mean, that's our new slogan at our organization: creating a culture where diversity, equity, and inclusion is at everything that we do. And we preach that, we live that every day, and we continue to try to get better at that. Because again, we're a 120-year-old company, and some of these things have been embedded for a long time. And so we are making some very meaningful progress and meaningful change, but we're nowhere near the finish line.
Let me ask you, Carlos, what has the Walgreens Boots Alliance done to make these results tangible? Has there been any financial commitments made by Walgreens to the racial equity, racial justice movement?
Well, we've contributed in a number of different ways to the racial equity movement. By one, there's several organizations in the community that we've given donations to. We've probably spent over, and this isn't a direct donation, but during what we call a peaceful protest during the George Floyd era, there were a number of our stores that were vandalized and burned and looted and just taken out of commission. And to the tune of over 30 million is to bring those services back into those communities. We made sure that we partnered with diverse contractors in those communities to rebuild those stores and to give those contracts and that economic opportunity to the individuals in those communities. As I said to you earlier, Farajii, we are in those communities. We are not in the all the affluent communities. I mean, where we set our stores up, there are 80% of Americans across the United States that are within 10 minutes of a Walgreens. 80% of Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So that means all communities. We are investing in those communities. And again, as I said, we can do more. We just announced a huge program on the south side of Chicago last week, and you'll probably be hearing more about that as we partner with Hope Chicago with a 7-figure plus donation to help give 4,000 Chicago public school students that want it a free education that's fully paid for. And I know you see a lot of these programs across the country that say we will pay for your college degree, but not your room and board or not your this. We're talking about fully paid if you do what you're supposed to do as a high school student and one of your parents. This program that we just partnered with in Chicago is offering 4,000 free college education over the next several years. And we're looking to expand that program. And it's us, and it's not just us, but it's other corporations in the Chicago metropolitan area. But we are one of the lead sponsors of that program with Hope Chicago.
That's Hope Chicago that you're speaking of. Is that correct, Carlos?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Awesome. And you know, by you saying that Walgreens is, 10 minutes away from, those within various communities. Of course, we know within the Black and brown communities, there are a lot of Walgreens around. But are we seeing an increase in the number of applicants of Black people who want to work in Walgreens? Are there, are folks taking advantage of those opportunities?
Yeah, some are and some are. I mean, right now we're having a hard time finding people just in any of our stores, no matter what community it is, because of the great resignation that we're living through right now across the country. I mean, people.
So you're looking for people. You're looking to hire people right now.
We're looking for folks that have a pulse. No, I'm just kidding, but that want to come in and work at the stores and make it. We have, I want to say 25,000 plus open jobs across the country that we're actively recruiting for, whether it's a CSA at the front line. But let me just say this, and again, we're not different from other retailers. And this is where, as I celebrate and talk to you guys about the great things we're doing, I also have to hold us accountable for the areas where we're falling short, right? We're doing a good job at diversifying those entry-level roles, okay? We're going to see a lot of diversity in the stores. What we're trying to make a difference is those middle managers and senior level positions where it's noticeably missing and lacking in diversity.
Yeah.
And that's where me and my team and the folks within organizations that I work with, we're focusing on leadership positions that make the decisions that represent those folks that are missing at those lower levels, so we can create a pipeline to the C-suite. If you go into many Walgreens stores across the state, you're going to see a lot of diversity, but it starts to drop off as you go up the ladder. And that's where we have issues and challenges, not just at our company, but at across corporate America. And what I can tell you, though, if you go on our website, and I feel real comfortable saying this, and you pull up our C-suite right now, you're going to see a very diverse C-suite. You're going to see an African-American woman leading the company. You're going to see our head of integration is an Indian woman. You're going to see our CHRO is a Caucasian woman. Our president of customer service and customer relations is an African-American woman. Compared to 5 years ago, dramatically different. And that was intentional. That didn't just happen by accident. But the key that runs through all of those positions, before we look at their color, we looked at how qualified and accomplished they were as business leaders. And guess what? They just happened to be Black or Indian or Asian or whatever the case may be. So highly qualified, highly capable, and yes, representing that swath of community that's often overlooked.
And you know what? One of the big things, Carlos and Laura, that I have to think about is, like, when we have these conversations, how do we make sure that these conversations doesn't fall into a place of quotas? Yeah. Because I think to Laura's point, you have all of these people, you have access to all of these communities, but then you're like, okay, we have to fill a quota. And I feel like in corporate America, it, and I know it, Carlos, it looks good. It sounds good. It makes for good press. But at the end of the day, in terms of policy, in terms of treatment by of customers, I mean, some things still don't change. So
Right.
so how do we break through that?
Well, so I'm going to say this, Farajii, and as I think about you sitting on that side of the screen and me sitting over here, we know that there's some things in our lives that have been happening for many, many, many years.
Come on, man. Come on. Yes, sir, brother.
I'll give you an example, and I'm not afraid to share this. I'm an executive at Walgreens. I went into one of our stores a number of years ago, and I was profiled in one of our own stores. Now, they didn't know I worked for the store because I was just Joe customer coming in. And we have to call that on the carpet when we see it happen in the moment and address it right there. And then come back and say, you know what, these problems still exist. Because what we're dealing with is the people that work for us come from the community. We're just a microcosm of society, right? Just because you come to work for me doesn't mean you check all of your biases at the door. So what we try to do is we try to give training and education to our employees around how we expect them to show up as an employee, living the values and the vision and the purpose of our company, which we're very clear on, to say, this is our expectation of you when you're representing us. Your views that you have from, after 5 o'clock when you leave here, I don't know that we're ever going to change how people think. I mean, think about what's happening in society. I wish I could tell you, if I had the magic bullet to change it inside corporate America, then I have the magic bullet to change it in society. We're a very divisive nation right now. And I think people are trying to figure out, how do we change that dynamic? Well, that's some of the same things we're working with inside. Some people think the work that we're doing is quota-based, and they've said it. Oh, you're just trying to check the box. But no, we're talking about highly qualified individuals that represent the communities that help grow our business. That's not a quota. That's good business practice.
Right.
Now, I may look like I'm 25 sitting on the screen looking like, but I've been around corporate America for 30 years. And in 30 years that I've been in corporate America, I can tell you these problems were when I first got out of college, as I moved up the ranks and as I moved through corporate America. There are some companies that, we're going to hire a chief diversity officer and check the box, and you don't get a budget, you don't get any staff, you don't do anything, but we're going to put on our website that we have a chief diversity officer. And then there are other companies that I work with that said, we're going to hire a chief diversity officer, give them a staff and budget, and we want to see some change happening, and we're all going to row the boat together, because Carlos, you can't make change alone. This has to happen from all of us coming together for one common mission.
No doubt.
It's all a mindset. It's not something I can give you a sheet of paper and say, this is how I want you to act while you're here, and I go do it. I don't have that control over people. I don't think anybody does.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Carlos, we appreciate your time today to talk about this very, very important matter of diversity and equity in the C-suite. How can people see the mini docu-series Ladder Lifting as We Climb?
Oh, if they can go to our website, WBA.com, and then there's, oh my God, I had the link right here in front of me. I'll get it to you, and then we'll put it out on your site. But I apologize. I got too many documents in front of me.
You got a lot of documents.
WBA.com. And then you'll see it's still featured on our website right now, but I can get you a link that you can share with your audience. And I just want to say thank you for having me, brother.
Oh, no doubt, brother. Anytime. We appreciate it. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And we look forward, if there's an opportunity to speak to Ms. Roz Brewer herself, we would love to talk to her about, the work that she's doing, the ground that she's breaking, and most importantly, moving the pendulum along, because we need to keep this momentum going, brother. So thank you so much for your time, Carlos.
Absolutely. Laura, it's nice meeting you as well.
All right. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come back, let's talk about the story of war, how the narrative around the Ukraine and Russian war is one thing, but this other issue of the African students in Ukraine in Ukraine is another narrative. We'll check in with Laura to get her take on it, as she's been seeing some trends and then, of course, some challenges. So stay with us for that conversation and a whole lot more in the next hour. You're tuned into The Culture right here on the Black Star Network.
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Folks, welcome to the second hour of today's show on the culture here on the Black Star Network. We've been having some great conversations talking about everything from President Trump being in hot water again to talking about diversity and equity in the C-suites with Walgreens executive Carlos Cubia. Now, I want to switch gears to check in with Laura Albast, who is a Palestinian youth organizer and a journalist. She's been a part of today's show, just providing some insight on some of these conversations. But one of the big things that her and I discussed, and the reason why I wanted to bring her onto the show, is to talk about this ongoing situation about the story of war. Now, we know, folks, that this war of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, there are many stories to come out of this, but one of the big stories is how African students who have been in Ukraine to get their education, thousands upon thousands, students from all across the continent, are now being forced to stay in Ukraine. They're not given the opportunity to leave the country, even in the midst of bombs falling from Russian forces. So I want to bring Laura Albast into this part of the discussion because I think it's worthwhile, Laura, that we really understand that narratives matter. This story of what we're seeing matter. First and foremost, I think everybody, it's been a week now since Russia has, started this full-scale military attack on the Ukraine. And I would say for the first 3 to 4 days, Ukraine had the public behind them, right? They had a sentiment that, hey, this is a smaller country that's being aggressed upon by a major superpower, and this is not right. And so the blue and yellow, peace for Ukraine, we stand for Ukraine hashtags started popping up everywhere. Then Keenan, put that story back up on the screen for us so we can see it. Thank you, sir. Look at this. Africans report racism and hostility trying to flee Ukraine. Open the door or we die. This is another story. This is a different narrative now, Laura, that we're forced to confront that, wait a minute. As we stood with Ukraine, Ukraine hasn't been standing with African students, haven't been standing with Black folks. How do we reconcile this? How do we process these different narratives?
So there's a few things to talk about. So I have a chronology that I'm going to go through. You have an invasion. Lives are on the line. The only way a journalist is able to describe the situation, as we have seen, is by comparing it to other wars, other conflicts that we have seen in our lifetimes. The media has a big role in shaping how people see the world. The invasion took place on February 24th. 2 days later, I'm going to give you specific examples of how journalists have compared this war. CBS News correspondent Charlie DeGata said that, with all due respect, this is not like Iraq or Afghanistan that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European country. We have Daniel Hannan at the Telegram saying that they seem so like us. That's what makes it so shocking. War is no longer something visited upon impoverished and remote populations. He also wrote that these people watch Netflix and own smartphones just like us, so we should care about them. Al Jazeera English, which was shocking to me, Peter Doby said that what's compelling looking at this is that there are not obviously refugees looking to get away from areas in the Middle East that are still in big state of war. They are not people trying to get away from areas in North Africa. They look like any European family that you would live next door to. And then last one, Philippe Courbet from BFM TV in France said that we're not talking about Europeans leaving in cars. We're talking about Europeans leaving in cars that look like ours to save their lives. The only way these journalists found to talk about the war in Ukraine is to dehumanize the brown people, the Black people, the Africans, the Yemenis, the Palestinians, the Syrians, the Afghanis, the Iraqis, everyone outside of Europe who is not white, who is not from an ethnic minority, to say that we are civilized and they are not. So that it is okay that countries in the region of the Middle East have gone through war because apparently we are built for it. It's okay for us to go through tragedy, but it's not okay for Europeans who look white. Now that narrative does something very dangerous.
Yeah.
It's a misrepresentation of the actual history of humanity. Europe is not free of wars or mistakes or histories. It is in my lifetime that Russia attacked Crimea, that there was a war with Georgia. It is in my lifetime and my parents' lifetime that we've seen former Yugoslavia go through war, that we've seen the Holodomor, the famine that Stalin had put on Soviet Ukraine and that killed 3 million people. So it's not like Europe is some place that is peaceful and that has seen nothing. So there's the association, which is the Arab and Middle Eastern Journalists Association, actually condemned all these reports. And they said, why are there Orientalist and racist statements being made to talk about the war in Ukraine? Why can't you just talk about the war in Ukraine? Why do you have to dehumanize and insult the tragedies and the suffering and the occupation and violence that other countries go through in the region? So you have that one segment of the reporting that is taking place. The other segment of that is misinformation.
Yeah.
And I speak of this specifically because I'm Palestinian and because I recognize when this news comes out, is that images from the Gaza war of last year in May, the 11-day war, the onslaught by Israel on Gaza that killed a lot of people, killed and annihilated entire families and buildings. Images of that war had been circulated online as if it is Ukraine. So that hurts me. My family home was
so. So wait a minute. I'll make sure I understand you here, Laura. You're saying images from past conflicts are being used to create the narrative for this present conflict.
Yes. So
and we can't, and unfortunately, those of us who are seeing these images, we just don't know the damn difference.
Yeah. And so unless you're regularly following news, you wouldn't know. So AP,
Right.
Associated Press, actually put out a fact-checking report that says that this image from an explosion that took place in Gaza by Israel is actually in Gaza. It is not in Ukraine, and it's been circulated as such. The second video that was circulated was from 2012 of a Palestinian named Ahed Tamimi, who was confronting an Israeli soldier. It was circulated as a Ukrainian child confronting a Russian soldier. It received over 10 million views on TikTok. And the reason it was assumed as such is because Ahed is blonde and she has blue eyes, which, that exists in the Middle East. And that is an erasure of her suffering, of her family's suffering. So that isn't fair. So that is and the other thing is, Daniel Hannan said this in the Telegraph. He said that we don't see war we only see war in impoverished countries. Ukraine is the poorest country in Europe. There are countries in the Middle East that are richer than Ukraine. It is absolutely not true. Brown and black countries are not poorer than European countries. Bangladesh, Nigeria, South Africa, Mexico, they all have higher GDPs than Ukraine. This is not about development. This is about race, very clearly.
So I mean, and one of the things that comes across my mind is, I'm just kind of reflecting on this, Laura, is the fact that we don't know. And I don't know if the solution is for us to become more, engaged, more informed about, foreign affairs, but we just don't know. You know what I'm saying? Now, a lot of our watchers here on the Black Star Network, very smart. They've been, they keep up with the news, highly informed. So, that's one group, but that's a small group compared to a lot of other people, the average American, quote unquote, right? Whether you're talking about Black American, Latino, Arab American, white American, a lot of the foreign affairs stuff is just out of our bounds, out of reach. We don't have a real way to like process.
You're right.
You know what I mean? Like what the affairs are in another country across the waters when we're trying to do with the day-to-day challenges here at home.
Exactly. And it's not your responsibility to know either. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It isn't. You are not, the viewer is not expected to have a PhD in foreign affairs history. That's not the issue at all. And it is almost impossible to combat misinformation in the social media world. Videos are going to circulate, images are going to circulate. But what we do have control over is the journalists themselves. These aren't journalists that suddenly graduated out of school and are suddenly put in Ukraine to report about this. They are veteran journalists who have reported on wars and other tragedies around the world. They know what they are doing. They know what they are saying. So why is it that they are reporting in a way that clearly is unbalanced and unfair to the history of humanity? So there's that. The other thing is, and I think it should be, embedded in all school systems anywhere around the world. But I do understand, we have a lack of resources because our governments prefer to send billions of dollars to fund oppressive regimes abroad than actually fund our education. But every student, every young person needs to have basic media literacy skills. How do I read a news item? How do I read its sources? It is so easy to do. So why aren't we implementing this in our schools?
Well, I mean, I think one of the big reasons simply is because media is often used to deceive. I mean, we're at a place, Laura, as you know, and you talked about it just a moment ago with social media, right? And I remember reading this this data that said that 50% of the news that 18 to 45 or so, the next generation, 50% of that age group get their news from social media, Facebook and other social media platforms. And it's like people aren't reading anymore. People aren't taking the time to say, okay, let me sit down and read this book, or taking the time to say, okay, let me read this article in the New York Times or USA Today or LA Times or Al Jazeera or the BBC. Let me go to these quote unquote, trusted news sources to get my information. No, they get their information from videos that are passed around on social media, from little little articles that people post, right? That take an article, that just take a quick snapshot of a headline, and then they go off on that headline without actually reading the article. There is no in-depth research that's being done. And I mean, and thinking about that question of you're essentially talking about how people can get back into a space of critical thinking. Like when we see something, do we fact check to ourselves, or do we just automatically assume that whatever we're seeing is the reality, is the truth? And I always have this conversation with people, Laura, that I feel like, that's one of the big reasons why it's hard for me to personally get on social media a lot, because it's like, man, where are you getting your information from?
Yeah.
And as a journalist, how do you penetrate through all of the madness to get people to see the truth of the matter? Like this whole situation around with the African students in Ukraine,
Okay.
And if people don't know, the Washington Post just posted something. They just posted a piece called Anti-Black Racism is Upending Easy Narratives About the Exodus from Ukraine. This is what the Washington Post. And they break down the history of African students residing in Ukraine, and the relationship that Africa has with Ukraine, Africa has with Russia, from the early 50s all the way into the 60s. But if you don't take the time to read this stuff, it's like, and then when we see this, we're like, this must happen in a bubble. I mean, how do we change the dynamic of this kind of like ignorant culture that we're seeing and experiencing?
As that is happening on social media, there are people, just private citizens, who are also trying to combat this misinformation. So the sphere of the internet itself has these two sides: the people who are putting out the misinformation, the people who are reading it, and the people who aren't journalists, who aren't experts, who have that form of media literacy, who go along and say, this isn't true, here's why.
Right.
Now, speaking on the African students in Ukraine and in general the narrative as well. So there's the issue as well of, we're not just reporting information, there's a narrative to it. So the New York Times, I think, published an article today about the protests that are happening in Russia and about the Russian police brutality against protesters.
Right.
And I have a colleague who made a comment and said, wow, the New York Times never reports so kindly on protests that take place in the United States. They had said that these protests are a remarkable display of defiance in a country where prison terms are sometimes sought for demonstrators. But when Black people were protesting in the United States, what did the journalists do? What did the New York Times do? They called it riots. They didn't actually do any fair covering of what was going on. And police brutality is just not covered the same way. And why is that? Why is that? Now, on the issue of African students in Ukraine, a lot of them have successfully escaped, but a lot remain stuck in the country.
All right, so let's stop there. Let's stop there real quick, Laura, because I don't know. Like, I came across some numbers, and first, I didn't know. I don't think a lot of people know that there a huge number of students are not in Ukraine. They actually have left. So that's for one. I came across some numbers that said that the Nigerian political officials said about 16,000 of their students were in Ukraine. But they didn't want, here's the crazy part. They were having issues and they didn't want the students back in here, back in Nigeria either. Whole nother conversation. But yeah, so I don't think people really understand like how like if it's reported one day, that things can legitimately change within a 24-hour period.
So I can give just a briefing of what I've seen. So I've been following a lot of Black and African students and individuals in the diaspora who have been organizing to help. So if you guys are on social media, anyone who's watching, you can follow the hashtags Black Foreigners Ukraine or Africans in Ukraine. They've been holding daily Twitter spaces and just organizing amongst themselves to give funding, support, transportation, and look for missing persons while coordinating with thousands of African students currently in Ukraine. So that's one aspect of what's going on. There are still thousands of students in Ukraine. So a number has successfully left after days of trying to cross the border. And some of them are right now in Poland, some are in Romania, some are trying to go to other countries on the border. And that's been easier to the students who have been in cities that are close to the border of Ukraine. And now, why are African students and Indian students and Arab students in Ukraine? It's because there is some educational opportunities, specifically medical and studying medicine. So a lot who are unable to go to school in their own countries go to Ukraine because it offers probably cheaper, probably access to actually studying medicine and becoming doctors. A lot of the Nigerian students are studying to be doctors. Yeah. Now, there's an issue with the cities that are in the interior of Ukraine. And one of them is Sumy, the city of Sumy. It has seen a lot of bombing and fighting between Russian and Ukrainian troops. And the students have been stuck. There's no food. There is no electricity or power. Many of them are either going into bomb shelters or going into the metro to hide underground. And they can't even leave, because if they try to leave, they may get stuck either on the border of the city or in the fighting that is taking place. So right now there's many Indian and African students stuck in interior cities that are not on the border of Ukraine. And that is a very big problem, and they need help. And there's just one more thing that I would like to say as well, is, the coverage of many many news organizations have talked about the anti-Blackness and the racism these students have faced. But what's also missing from that is, where's the coverage to hold the embassies accountable, to hold the governments of other nations accountable? Do we know what they're doing to get the students out there? Can we also cover that? Can we talk about that so that we are more informed, that when we talk about African students, it's not just about race, it's also about their life?
So how do we do that? Because I feel like there has to be a humanizing element to both reporting and to making sure that the story, takes into consideration who they are. You know what I'm saying? And I think there has to be, and I think what you're speaking of, and I may be wrong, and so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like what you're speaking about is intention. Like, what is the intention of the writer? What is the intention of the media source where you're about to report on something? Are you intending to report on the facts, or are you intending to create a narrative that that benefits another spin or another view about the scenario? One of the big things that come to my mind as I'm listening to you, Laura, is the situation what we saw just a few months ago last year around the Haitian migrants that were coming across the Texas border. And I remember there were so many people on social media talking about, kind of like resharing this image of Haitian migrants, our Haitian brothers and sisters, being under this bridge right down in Texas. And it was constantly shared, to the point that even when the migrants actually left, like there were no more migrants on the ground, people thought that they were still there. And it was like the storytelling around how they got there, who they were, all of that. I mean, it just became so muddled. Then people were like, oh my gosh, the government is sending men on horses with whips. and they look like they're slave drivers. And I mean, just the conversation around that situation, that issue, it was just like it went from 0 to 100 in 2.5 seconds. You know what I mean? And I thought to myself, I was like, but are we taking the time to really understand what's going on? Who is responsible for what? It just seems like when we have these big humanitarian issues, and Black people, brown folks that are marginalized, that we just don't get a fair share in the storytelling.
And that's a great way to approach it, Farajii, because as I bring back an earlier point, is that the media's role is to shape how people see the world. But its role is also to hold people accountable and hold themselves accountable for the reporting. So you're talking about the Haitian migrants. What's missing is that what we don't know is that the United States has supported the dictatorship in Haiti for 30 years. In many ways, the United States is the reason why people are leaving Haiti and coming to the border of the United States. And then the US government is fighting back. So what is...
Right.
And the other thing of how can people sort of... It is on the journalists. It is on the journalists to cover, to humanize. And the situation in Ukraine right now, we are in a situation of war. I can't just ask someone to, hey, can you please talk to me about your experience? And they're trying to hide from bombing. They're not going to talk to me. So as journalists, we also have to recognize that the safety of the people that we are reporting on comes first. So what is the intention of posting and publishing stories about anti-Blackness that don't recognize whether these students are stuck or not, whether these students are provided aid or not? Why aren't we seeing the stories about the Black and African organizers in the diaspora who have organized thousands on Telegram groups to be able to send funds, food, and transportation to students to cross the border? Mm-hmm. So you're totally right. It's about the intent. Is it because we want clickbait, because racism is trendy and trendy online, and we want to just read what other European countries are doing outside of our bubble? Why don't we talk about the things that we can do right now in a moment of crisis?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree, and I'm so happy that we can have this discussion, because I feel like it will force and compel people to think deeper about the situation that we find ourselves in, which is information is always going to be presented, but we just don't know where the information is. We have to do our due diligence to make sure that the information is verifiable, to make sure that the information is as unbiased as possible, and to make sure that the information is timely. And, I remember, I'm not a quote unquote journalist, but I adhere to journalistic standards. You know what I mean? I want to make sure that, for example, that anytime we talk on this show, that we're hitting all of the marks. Is it timely? Does it affect people in a certain way? Does it speak to my audience? And all of those things. And I feel like whether you're a blogger, whether you're a podcast host, whether you're a writer, like, you need to adhere to journalistic standards, because presenting information, hell, you might not even have no platform in that respect, but you simply are a person that uses social media. You still should adhere to journalistic standards when you're sharing information and not giving half-ass truths and you know what I mean, and just creating a lot of fervor and getting people upset. I feel like we're creating this culture where this is where there are no boundaries. As long as what people post and as long as what people are saying draws some type of reaction, most of the time a negative reaction, then guess what? It's acceptable. People just accept it. People just take it and say, oh man, that was good, or they really made me mad. I don't care about making people mad. I want to get the truth out. I want to help people to see the world as it is, so that way they can feel empowered to make it what they want it to be. I want to make sure that people have the necessary tools of knowledge to be able to make the decisions that will affect their lives. I don't care if we're not always talking about the sexiest things, but we're talking about the important things. Can you speak to that?
Yeah.
I didn't want to go on a tirade.
Oh no,
Laura.
I'm good. You're good. No, 100%. And we can do something right now instead of just, taking the information in. There's something we can do right now for the African students that are stuck in Ukraine. If you're on social media, go to the hashtags Black Foreigners Ukraine or Africans in Ukraine. These are strangers who don't know each other, who are kind enough to put their lives on hold to help people from their own countries and to help students that they know or don't know. There's something we can do right now. We can share their stories right now. We can join their Twitter spaces and listen directly from them and what they need and what we can do. And this is if we really care about what's going on in Ukraine, we can do that. Instead of just sharing and resharing. What's the point? if you're adamant on sharing and resharing a lot of information, what is your point? Are you just raising awareness, or do you want to do something about it?
I think people think they just raising awareness, but you know what? That just comes along with, people say, oh, I'm raising awareness for people that don't know. But you got to raise awareness in a very strategic way. You don't just raise awareness. Like, you just don't throw shit out there and be like, all right, y'all process that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, here you go. You if you're going to raise awareness, there is a skill, there's a strategy behind that. Like, we can't just talk about Ukraine and Russia and we don't have, people that understand that part of the world, and we're just talking. Like, you have to raise awareness, but you got to be intentional and strategic about it. Very quickly, I want to share what some of our watchers have been saying. Nicole Spicer said, many people do not fact check or do research on information that come across their eyes and into their ears to make sure that it is true. Hallelujah. Oh my goodness, Nicole, you are absolutely right. Zoe said, no one can deny what's happening in Ukraine is a tragedy. American news outlets feed off of our emotions and ignorance. That's why platforms like Black Star Network really matter. Yeah. That's exactly why it matters. Yeah. I mean, I don't get into clickbait. I don't care about emotions in terms of, oh, let's just make people mad. Let's make people smart. Let's make people informed. And I truly believe, and Laura, I know you do because of the work that you're doing, you would rather have a small informed group of people than a large ignorant group of people.
100%.
That's sharing your words and that's talking about your word. Give me the small group of people, because those are the people that are going to make the change. So, look, we got to take a quick pause. When we come back, let's talk about something I think is important. There is a museum that is going to be opening later on this year in South Carolina, but people have been saying that this museum was built on hallowed ground because it was built on the grounds where many Black people were enslaved. We'll break down the history for you and ask the question: do you think that this museum should do something to acknowledge those who have lost their lives on that soil? Stay with us. That conversation is coming up next here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
am Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for a Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. Let's talk about something, as we've been talking a little bit about history and telling the story properly with our special guest, Laura Albast. I want to talk to you about a museum that's opening. For those of you that is in the South Carolina area, you probably have heard that there is a highly anticipated museum that is going to be opening in the city of Charleston, South Carolina. It's set to open in the latter part of this year. But it is one of the most highly anticipated cultural institutions. And the property is going to hold the history about America's ugliest secret, which is about the transatlantic slave trade. The International African American Museum, which will be located at the Gadsden Wharf on the Charleston Harbor, which has been under construction since 2019, is set to open later this year. Now, here's the thing about it. It holds a significant amount of importance because according to the Charleston County Public Library in 1758, Captain Christopher Gadsden purchased the land on the Cooper River that his father once owned. He eventually used this site on the east side of the Charleston Peninsula and along the river's waterfront as a port for other sea-bound vessels. Now, within a month of his buying the land, the area was known for slave auctions. People would buy human cargo. Can you believe this, folks? We were considered to be human cargo right alongside pine wood and bushels of oyster shells. I just want you to let that marinate for a minute. People, Black people, our ancestors, human cargo were seen as commodities, not as humanity, a commodity, right alongside pine wood and bushels of oyster shells. Though on December 1st, 1774, South Carolina voted to stop importing Africans, historians assert that Gadsden's Wharf continued to receive the captives all the way up to and beyond December 1803, when the laws reopened the slave trade. Now, according to the Smithsonian, check this out. Here's another little interesting history fact. Nearly half of all enslaved Africans brought to the United States of America came through Charleston's Gadsden Wharf, adding to why the national institution named the new museum one of its most anticipated museums to open this year. One of the attractions to the new museum is that it will store never before told stories from African people, enslaved and free, who populated South Carolina's Low Country. The museum will also feature historic figures and events that outline the substantial role that America's eighth state played in the transatlantic slave trade. Now, there's a Black woman by the name of Dr. Tanya Matthews, who serves as the president and CEO, said that the work that she is doing to get the museum open and to share the history with the masses is a weighty privilege. She shared with the news there that they have more than $100 million in donations and 20,000 charter members already associated with the museum. I want to bring back Laura Albas to, as we talk about this. Man, oh man, Laura, I want to get your take on this very quickly, because something about this, and I'm like really excited, and I feel like when we have an opportunity to really tell our story, like it especially because this museum is actually built on the hallowed grounds where Africans were enslaved and purchased. I just, you know, it's something very spiritual, and this is something very special about honoring those who lost their lives in that horrific journey of the transatlantic slave trade. And as a woman of history, as a woman that understands history, you know, do you think that this country is taking a, you know, making better progress in making sure that we are doing, that it's doing its part to tell the stories of the people who have made this country great?
I think we're trying, but I don't think that we're there yet. I'm actually curious about the museum. Do you know if they're going to maybe start when they open? Are they going to talk about the history of the land? Are they going to just open up with that and say that we are built on this land and this is what has happened?
I'm assuming, and you know, I don't know. I don't know yet. And you know what? I think what we'll try to do is try to see if we can get Dr. Tanya Matthews to come on to talk about this as we get closer to that date. But I, you know, that is so funny because that was one of the first things that I was thinking about when I first heard about this story. I was like, I wonder if they're going to, you know, in African tradition, you go through some rituals where you kind of cleanse the space for the ancestors to communicate to the ancestors, right? And I've seen it within the Pan-Africanist community, and I've seen it done in a number of different times. But it's like you're welcoming the ancestors to be there in those spaces, and it's like I believe that they will take the time to say, look, this is hallowed ground. This is what we're, you know, here where we stand is where Africans were enslaved. I hope they do the whole ritual. I really do.
I hope so too as well. And I have the same feelings as you. There is a part of me that's like, oh, this is exciting. This is a museum that's going to educate and talk about the history of African Americans in the US. But at the same time, it's very it's very troubling where the museum is being built. And it reminds me of other cases in the United States. Maybe the museum is not part of that, but in general, when the US opens up centers, buys property, things like that were mainly sites of torture of slaves in the United States. It's never accidental. It's sometimes deliberately done. Maybe not
right.
With the museum.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know if you remember when oh my God, Donald Rumsfeld, when he bought a property in Louisiana, he pushed for the Iraq War. He bought a property in Louisiana that was used to break and torture slaves like Frederick Douglass. And and he took joy in celebrating the Southern Confederacy, and he didn't get it's very infuriating to even talk about, because a lot of elites who rule this country take joy in celebrating the Southern Confederacy. They take
it makes me think, oh Lord, my goodness. Oh my goodness. I did not know I did not know that history. So you've enlightened me today with that one. I did not know that. But I do know that there is a very kind of like an unnatural, savage, for lack of a better word, I just keeps coming to my mind. It's like this, like you said, like this savage like joy that you get from, being in a certain space where tragedy took place and you're celebrating. And we could talk about Black people, we can talk about any marginalized group of people in this country. And we had a conversation just on the show a couple of days ago, Laura, where we said, we talked about Frederick Douglass. Henry Louis Gates said Frederick Douglass should be on the dollar bill. And one of the things that I mentioned was, how good would it be if we saw a country whose currency reflected those who have given their lives, and whose lives were taken to make this country great? And I'm not just talking about Black people. I'm talking about Latinos, talking about Arabs, Native Americans, Asian Americans, to have individuals' faces on the currency. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It was just something that, when you said that, it was like, there is something inherently wrong to take pleasure on someone else's pain.
I mean, you didn't interrupt me at all. I feel with you, and I agree with you 100%. And I think that we should also, while we're looking at the past and holding people accountable and paying tribute to our ancestors and what they had to go through, we also need to remember that we're still here, and we are still facing very similar things to what they faced. And we are not a community that lives in the past and doesn't exist. We're still here. We need to be celebrated today as well as we should be celebrated in the past for our own achievements. And I think, I'm not sure if this is correct, but isn't Harriet Tubman going to be on the $20 bill?
Yes. It will take another few years. The word, it was supposed to have happened in 2020, but I believe because some people say, oh, because of COVID.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't COVID. It was some other stuff. But I think they're looking to release that new currency in 2030, another 10 years.
Oh.
So I don't know when we might see somebody else's face. Maya Angelou is on our currency right now. But I don't know when we will see someone else's face. But it does beg the question, and I want to get your take on it. How do we make sure that even in the moment, like you have this International African American Museum that's going to be opening, there is going to be currency with the great heroes and sheroes from that time period. But then there's also this push to make sure that certain history, like Black history, is not taught in schools. There's this push where the whole idea of infringing upon white theology, white supremacy teaching is getting more momentum from students. How do we bridge that gap? How do we make sure that the next generation don't come up thinking that history was whitewashed? How do we make sure that the next generation understand the plight and the struggle of those around them?
So first of all, I'm going to say that it's incredible that we're going to have someone represented on the currency, hopefully soon, because 50% of this country is children of color. 50% of children are of color in this country. But on your point of how this can be represented, there should be, in my opinion, I think there should be a federally mandated curriculum about slavery in America, because many states, even, minority majority states like Texas or Arizona, they're led by people who do not push for a proper education on this history. And we need to stop, claiming ignorance on this issue when this is what built the entire history of the United States. So one thing that we should be lobbying for, all our representatives that want our votes, federally mandate a curriculum on slavery in schools.
I think so too. I think so too. I don't think, and folks, let me just let y'all know, folks, because I'm looking at the website right now. If you go to IAAmuseum.org, which stands for International African American Museum, IAAmuseum.org, you will see that they have a number of programs coming up. They actually got a program coming up for International Women's Day on March the 8th. And look at this rendition here, folks. My team is awesome. Take a look at this rendition of what this would look like on the Gadsden Wharf. I look, we need to be, and look, and I'm gonna be honest with you, Laura. In school, I did not take enough time. I was not the history buff. I was not the history guy, right? I was I was the communications guy. I always liked communications. But now that I have matured and growing, history is so important because a lot of our communication, it has been based upon what we know and how we tell our story. And I think that it is absolutely essential that we do all that we can to make sure that the history of Black people or any people that have been oppressed in this country is preserved in any way, shape, or form. I think that's absolutely important. But to see that you're going to have these type of museums, and this is again backed by the Smithsonian, which is the National Museum Network, to have that type of a nod from the Smithsonian for something of this magnitude, right there in Charleston, South Carolina, the same place where just a few years ago we saw that Trump rally of white supremacists, who were rallying with tiki torches and all of those things. I mean, this is also the same place where Dylan Roof walked into a Black church and killed 9 Black parishioners in the church. In the church. Charleston, South Carolina is such a critical place in our history that we can't overlook it. And to have something like this in Charleston is amazing. I really, we're going to do our best to reach out to Dr. Tanya Matthews, but I just love the fact that we need to preserve our history, Laura, at any way, shape, or form. And most importantly, we need to get Black people, we need to get folks from other communities to tell their stories, because this country will not change. And I think you've been organizing young people in domestically and across the waters. This situation that we find ourselves in terms of race relations in this country and the treatment of people, the level of injustice we've seen, none of this is going to change if people are afraid to be who they are and are afraid to accept their history.
Exactly. 100%. And we should also do the work. Unfortunately, we have to do the work as well as organizers on the ground from these communities to inform and educate and combat all the narratives that dehumanize us or try to erase our history. So, it's a two-edged sword.
It is a two-edged sword. It is a two-edged sword. And I think that's one of the big things that we're going to have to grapple with. And I'm really happy, and I'm happy about having you as part of this conversation or having you as part of this show. And I want to bring other voices that normally we don't get a chance to hear from, right? Representing various communities of this country. Like, we need to know that even though we're different in some ways, we're still all oppressed by white supremacy. we're still all oppressed by white supremacy. We're still fighting to get heard, to be seen, to have our history told, to have our stories told. And you know, we have more similarities, more things in common than we do differences. And I would love for my children to learn about the culture and the history of other people, so that way they can have a greater appreciation for them. I think it's absolutely insane, Lord, that we in a time period where nobody wants to learn a damn thing about each other.
It's really unfortunate.
And for example, you know, I know that, and we got a couple of moments left, you know, there are a number of folks that are, you know, I personally want to know, you know, what are some of the latest things that we need to keep our eyes on within the Palestinian community, within the work of, you know, the work that you're doing. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Of course, I can only speak on the Middle East because that's where I'm from and where I'm focused. But
Yeah.
you know, as our eyes and the international community is focused on Ukraine, you know, Yemen was bombed a few days ago by a U.S.-backed coalition, which is Saudi Arabia. Something I always think about is that apparently the United States is capable of sanctioning countries who do injustices and oppress other people, yet it still funds oppressive regimes as well. The Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi was chopped up in a Saudi consulate in Turkey. And the U.S. was like, okay, we're going to give more money to Saudi Arabia so it can continue its war. So these are things that are in the back of my mind. You know, right now, while we're also looking at Ukraine and the border situation with Poland, there are Syrian and Afghani refugees who are still stuck between the border between Poland and Belarus. Belarus won't take them back, and Poland won't let them in. So we also need to keep in mind that a lot is happening in the world. It is a lot. And if you all remember, you know, the situation in Palestine last year in May of 2021, it is continuous. The families are still fighting for their homes in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem. We actually saw an extremist right-wing politician called Ben Gvir do a makeshift office in the home of one of the women, the Palestinian women residents, and he called for all settlers in the area to come and terrorize. So we've been seeing a lot of images come out of there as well. I know it's a lot, especially for people who might not be interested in news or might not have the bandwidth or the capacity to always follow through, but a lot is happening. And because of Ukraine, we have seen that the international community is capable of calling an occupation by its name. It's capable of sanctioning and revoking Russian products. It's capable of punishing Russia for what it's doing in Ukraine. So it makes me wonder if they're capable of all these things that when we lobbied and asked for, they said, no, you are an activist. They dismissed us for what we're saying. They said they did not understand what it meant. They clearly understand what it means. But is it because it's a European white country that is having to go through it? So these are things I'm thinking about right now. These are things that I'm keeping in my mind.
Absolutely. Well, you know what, Laura, you have a home here. We'll bring you back on, and especially when some of the latest developments and all of these international stories take place, we would love to have you as one of our, you know, contributors, correspondents to bring us up to date on some of the latest happenings, because I didn't know that was happening in Yemen. And you know, we need to stay up to date. So, you know, folks, you will be seeing a lot more from Laura Albas. Laura, thank you so much for your time today. I truly appreciate you. Thank you so much,
Farajii, and inshallah, I'll join you guys again.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Oh man, folks. Again, if you want to go to the information about the International African American Museum, IAAmuseum.org. IAAmuseum.org. My goodness, what a great show that we had today. Look, I need your support, folks. This is why we are doing what we do, because we want to have these conversations. We want to bring people on that can enlighten us, expand our view of ourselves and the world that we're living in. We need your support for Black Star Network. So check us out at blackstarnetwork.org. You can download the app. You can give in a variety of ways. Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, Zelle. Make sure that you tell your family and friends about the network. Make sure you tell your families and friends about the work that we're doing, the program, the dynamic programming. Look, if you don't listen to me, you don't watch the culture, that's fine with me. Watch something. Watch something. Watch Balanced Life. Watch The Black Table. I don't care. Just watch something on the Black Star Network. You don't have to watch it with us. You can just watch something and you will still be a supporter of Black-owned media. Again, we want to thank our very important guest. We want to thank Mr. Luke Broadwater from the New York Times. We want to thank Carlos Cubia from Walgreens, and certainly my partner today, Laura Albas, for joining us for the conversation. Stay tuned at the 6 o'clock hour is Roland Martin Unfiltered with my big brother Roland Martin. And as always, folks, make sure that you continue to support us. Follow me on all my social media platforms at Farajii Muhammad, FARAJIIMUHAMMAD. I'm looking for family. I'm looking for friends. I'm looking to make connects. And of course, share every show that we're putting out there. If you like the conversation, let your family and friends know, but we need your support. All right. I appreciate you. As always, never be afraid to challenge what's wrong. Stand for what's right while being yourself in the process. God willing, we'll talk tomorrow for another exciting edition of The Culture right here exclusively on the Black Star Network. Peace.